right, this story dropped yesterday, and I will admit it surprised me that the NFL has said no thank you to Brendan Sorsby. And on the Brendan Sorsby side, as we've talked about, despite his admitted addiction to gambling, admitting and being caught for betting on gambling or betting on sports and betting on football and being a gambling addict at 3 different schools now over his college career, including betting on the team he plays for, which is the red line you can't cross. Brendan Sorsby was still dead set on continuing to play football this fall. That's really seems to be the mission for he and Texas Tech and his lawyer. It's not about accountability. It's not about admitting what you've done. Yeah. Oh, I went to rehab. His mission has been to play football, whether it was for Texas Tech, whether it was now in the NFL, and not face the consequences of his actions, whether it's an addiction or not. And yesterday, the NFL made it clear that yes, he will. Like he's been declared eligible by the NCAA, not once but twice. Sorsby, wanted to take his talents to the NFL after the Big 12 and rallied to say, no, you're not playing in our league this year, young guy. Well, let me take it to the NFL. Well, the NFL had another idea, and they will not hold a supplemental draft in 2026. And here's the interesting part in the fallout to this. This is why I was surprised when it came down, because everybody I talked to from the legal side of things was, well, look, the league won't step in and say no. They'll let the teams decide. The teams will then decide. Yeah. Because, look, this is a league that has opened the door to ineligible players for any number of reasons. I mean, Josh Gordon out of Baylor was drugs and alcohol and an addiction to those things. And Baylor ran him off, and he was no longer eligible, and they opened it up, said, come on in, and they drafted him. NCAA rule breakers like Terrell Pryor. It's just been over and over again. Ahmad Brooks at Virginia flunked out and wasn't eligible because he didn't make grades. Well, they let him in. And so the league has had a pretty, consistent history of just allowing this. And then they'll let the teams decide. But clearly, the NFL in this case is drawing a line and saying, no, whatever we've done previously, because, if you read the letter from the lead counsel, this didn't come from Roger Goodell, but the lead lawyer for the NFL sent a letter to Brendan Sorsby. It was very personal in explaining their decision. Said the league wasn't planning on having a supplemental draft this year. His was the only application they received. They submitted with only a handful of days ahead of the deadline, and the NFL felt there wasn't enough time to properly evaluate the situation, didn't have a complete record of the NCAA's investigation. It was also stated that the petition didn't have any supporting information or documents as to why he should be granted. So essentially, he just filled out an application and didn't put any backing thing of I've been to rehab, I've done this, I'm ready to do this. And then at the end, the league made it clear that they used the word integrity. He did, the lead counsel, several times with the letter, what appears to be an effort to drive home their stance on gambling. And it closes with the statement that the NFL is a privilege, and Sorsby should focus on preparing for possible entry into the draft in 2027. Now, his lawyer, Jeffrey Kessler, put out a statement yesterday or late last night that said, look, in late April, we inquired with the NFL. This was back in April, several months ago. We inquired with the NFL about the process for gaining entry into the supplemental draft. And Jeffrey Kessler says the response from the league was that all that was required was a short application which needed to be submitted by the 22nd of June. So we asked about this, and now you're excoriating my client because he didn't bring any evidence, he didn't do anything more. But you said, we asked you about this, and at no point, according to his lawyer, Jeffrey Kessler, did the NFL indicate that it would need or want to review anything other than the application itself. So he said last week, my client went to the draft application, asked for basic background information, responses to 4 yes or no questions, and that it was included a small space for Sorsby to state, why are you applying for the supplemental draft? And he filled that out like they had told him to do. And now they're doubling back saying, well, you should have given us more. We needed more lead time. We need more information. So this is lawyer talk. But at the same time, when I first heard this, why didn't he put some supporting information? Yeah. But you can understand them inquiring about it and then being told all you need to do is fill this out. And this is just kind of common practice. Well, Josh Gordon, Terrell Pryor, we'll let our teams decide. But in this case, they didn't. In this case, they're drawing a line, and they're using the word integrity, which they have never done before. Listen to Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, talking about this. He is a lawyer. Mike Florio, whether you love him or hate him, on Pro Football Talk, he is a lawyer and speaks from a lawyer perspective, and he also was surprised with the decision.
When quarterback Brendan Sorsby applied for the supplemental draft, the first question was whether or not the NFL would accept his application. The NFL has rejected that application and decided not to hold a supplemental draft. The NFL's reason is there isn't enough time to fully investigate what happened with Brendan Sorsby as it relates to gambling on his team, gambling when he was underage. And also the NFL expressed concern that Sorsby hasn't demonstrated accountability for his actions. Well, when you look at the CBA, there's nothing in there about accountability. There's nothing in there about investigation when it comes to eligibility for the supplemental draft. And lawyer Jeffrey Kessler, who's represented Sorsby in his fight against the NCAA, has made it clear that he believes the NFL's position violates both the CBA and the law, which means there could be litigation coming and there could be an effort to force the NFL to let Sorsby into the supplemental draft.
On top of that, I'm sure Jeffrey Kessler could find teams who would have been willing to draft his player.
Sure.
And so this is the NFL protecting its shield. But I just, I'm a believer that the teams should decide. And the NFL saying we didn't have time to do an investigation. Well, the teams would do the investigation between now and late July when the supplemental draft would happen. That would be on the teams. It's not the NFL doesn't investigate prospects for the actual draft. The teams do that. That's what they pay all their scouts for. That's what they pay all their people for. I do find it interesting that the NFL is the one saying, nah, that ain't going to happen. It's a new precedent. It's a new stance. Is it all about gambling and how serious they want to come down on gambling? Is it about accountability for a young guy?
Yeah.
But they've never held that stance with anybody else.
That's true. But I think that it's how he carried himself and how his team carried himself through this process. I think that is just from my reading of Larry Ferrazzani, general counsel of the NFL Management Council's letter. I think it's about the I think it's that. I think it's the accountability angle.
You're hell bent on playing despite the actions, and you're not playing now.
And you also have shown no remorse for your actions. Blah blah blah. I think that's part of it, and whether they're going to continue to sue to get Brendan Sorsby what he wants, that remains to be seen. But I think that's kind of the whole point.
I think, and I'll say that this is exactly what I said to Texas Tech when this first came down. After he was ruled ineligible by the NCAA, and then he appealed that, and the NCAA said, "No, you're ineligible." At that point, I argued that Texas Tech should stand down and just take it. Take your medicine, bet on a bad horse, no pun intended or all pun intended, and we got to take it. We didn't know, couldn't have known apparently according to Tech and all that crew, but we didn't know. And but man, we gotta stand down. We gotta listen to the letter of the law from the NCAA. Even though we probably could fight it, we probably could find a court that would be on our side, and they did. They shouldn't have done that. And the Big 12 then made it clear you shouldn't have done that. Like, we don't want to play you. We don't want you in our conference if that's the stance you're going to take. And I would argue that right now, as Mike Florio just said, there probably is a legal case that Jeffrey Kessler, because Jeffrey Kessler, people talk about him suing the NCAA and winning. He has sued the NFL before and won. A lot. He's very good at what he does. But they shouldn't. Like Brendan Sorsby shouldn't. You probably could win, but you really want to sue the 800-pound gorilla that is the NFL and win? You think that's going to be good for your long-term career? Ask Maurice Clarett about that.
I don't like being places where I'm not wanted. I don't know about you.
Remember, I was on the radio long enough to know that when Maurice Clarett got ruled ineligible, after his freshman year, Maurice Clarett grew up with LeBron James in Ohio, Northeast Ohio. They were buds. One's in Youngstown, one's in Akron, which is about 20 minutes apart. And one is a superstar basketball player, one is a superstar football player. The basketball player got drafted because the league's rules in the NBA were different, and he went to the Cleveland Cavaliers and started making a fortune and got a deal with Nike and was on covers of magazines. The other guy, by the NCAA's rules, went to Ohio State, where he couldn't take money and couldn't get paid, and helped lead Ohio State to a national championship, if you remember. And number 13, Maurice Clarett, was the difference in them winning that national title. Their quarterback was a guy named Craig Krenzel. Jim Tressel, who's going to go into the Ohio State Ring of Honor apparently this year, was the head coach, defensive-minded, play field position, and the X factor that put them over the top that year to beat Miami, a great Miami team for a national title, was Maurice Clarett. And he wasn't allowed to make money. He got in trouble for taking, things before the rules or the current rules, which he shouldn't have done. But remember, then he sued the NFL to be able to enter the NFL draft ahead of time. Like he's like, I'm going then. If LeBron can be in the NBA and make money, I'm going to sue. Well, that led to a long and winding road that went really bad for Maurice Clarett, whether he was right legally or wrong that they shouldn't have an age limit, and if a team wants to, because that was his argument, same thing, Jack. If a team wants to take me just because I'm 19 Why are you preventing me with this arbitrary age rule? Adrian Peterson had the same argument a few years later. Mm-hmm. But the idea of suing the NFL, even if you're right, Maurice Clark might have been right, but he lost and never even got out of the beginning stages. But because the NFL was a collectively bargained rule, they agreed to it. You weren't getting there. But Maurice Claret's point is kind of the same as what Brendan Sorsby's would be. Like, hey, let the teams decide. Well, don't do this. All it takes is one of the 32 teams. But the NFL is saying no. And all I would say for Brendan Sorsby at this time, just take the loss. Just
for once,
work on yourself.
Yeah. All
off season. Watch football. Don't bet on it. And again, anybody that I've talked to that's been in serious addiction, help seeking, you typically relapse. Typically, if you have a real severe problem, which by all accounts it appears he does, that he grew up gambling, he grew up on his phone making bets in high school and just carried it right in, and then he couldn't stop when he was told to stop, which tells you he's got a serious problem.
Yeah.
They typically relapse, which I'm sure is part of what the NFL is thinking. Like, this guy's he did a 35-day program because he got caught, and now it's the summertime and he still wants to play football. That guy needs to go take a pause. He needs to work on himself. We'll still be here. The NFL is still going to be here in the draft of 2027. We'll be here next year. Go be accountable. Go work on yourself. Come back into the draft process of 2026. We'll get you to the combine. We'll get you to you'll be a part of that with Arch Manning and Dante Moore and all these other guys. Mm-hmm. I know you don't want that, but at this point you don't get what you want.
Yeah.
And he shouldn't sue for it, even though he possibly could win.
I think you're right. The question of why don't we just let the teams decide, I don't disagree with that. I think that's perfectly valid. But this quote from Larry Ferrazzani, this letter I mentioned before, about the idea of having the supplemental draft. He says, your petition, filed 3 business days before the deadline without any supporting information or documentation, and only after abandoning your recent litigation efforts to avoid NCAA sanctions, does not provide a basis for the league to alter those plans being not having a supplemental draft. To me, that's a question of, we don't like your conduct, we don't like the way y'all have handled this on your end, and we're allowed to do what we want.
But again, it's not wrong for Jeffrey Kessler to say, well, wait a second, you liked Josh Gordon's conduct?
I agree with that, too.
You accepted Josh Gordon's conduct?
I think...
this guy was he was driving drunk. He was out of control.
Push and pull, right?
He was doing things that were putting other people's lives in jeopardy, and you didn't hold the line there. And you've drafted many an addict into the NFL, and many a wife beater and all that, but obviously gambling is the red line. And I do think legally, just by my read of it, they do have a case. And Jeffrey Kessler probably could win, much like he did against the NCAA. But is that the best course? If you want to play football for the next 10 years in the NFL, which everybody says you have the talent to do, is this the best course of that? Probably not. Actually, no, it is not. The NFL doesn't want your noise. They don't want the loudness of it. They don't want it. They don't want to even have their teams have to think about it right now. Do the right thing. Take your year off. Get ready for football in the spring would be my guess, or be my advice to him. But, he's not asking my advice.